One of the remarkable things about the Knights Templar Crusaders today is their secrecy and the way they control the monetary system of the world. And they say that they're not a secret society, but a society of secrets. And either way, it's secrecy. And when you go down to the City of London, you see at the entranceway to the square mile these reptilian gargoyle type things, which illustrates the Luciferian nature of the Knights Templar religion. And when the Queen goes down to the City of London, she bows her head, and she went and visited the Bank of England with the Duke. And so let's have a look at that now.
In the City of London, it's money that normally does the talking. But on their visit to the Bank of England, it was what the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh said that has got everyone chatting. After having been guided through the bank's gold vault, the Queen finally got an answer to a question she controversially posed 4 years ago. Here at a visit to the London School of Economics in 2008, she was heard asking why nobody noticed the economic downturn coming. Back to today, and
he and his group here are going to answer your question from 4 years ago, why nobody saw the crisis coming.
And after a brief explanation, another question, this time from the Duke.
There's not another one coming.
But the Queen, it seemed, was engaged and had plenty to say on the matter.
I suppose in money terms, it's very difficult to foresee. But people have got a bit lax, you know? Complacency.
And then a question about the city's regulator.
Yes, because the financial service, what are they called, the regulator?
Financial Services
Authority, which was really quite new, wasn't it? Really? But it didn't have any teeth or something.
These are sensitive issues, and while couched largely in question form, the comments may be seen as interference.
She's asking the sort of questions that anybody else would ask. Anybody who is in business, anybody who is suffering as a result of the credit squeeze, anybody who is in debt, anybody who really is struggling, they would ask the same questions. It just so happens it was the Queen at the Bank of England. She had a captive audience in the very people that run the economy, so why not ask the questions?
In this case, the questions have resulted in a statement from the Financial Services Authority, in which they say, "We've widely acknowledged that the regulatory approach before the financial crisis in 2008 was flawed and has since been completely changed. Parliament is now awaiting royal assent for the Financial Services Bill." Like it or not, the Queen isn't just about handshakes and bouquets. What she says carries a lot of value. How much of an impact these comments will have is the million-pound question. Paul Harrison, Sky News.
Bank of England here. And it even says here, on this pyramid-y thing, it says, let's just bring it. It says, close to this panel is the Royal Exchange, which contains a new retail development, Mansion House, the official home of the Lord Mayor of London during his year in office, and the Bank of England, founded in 1694 as a private company, is now exercising the functions of a state bank. It says it here. Get close to it. It's here, where my finger is. Bank of England, founded in 1694 as a private company. Founded as a private company and now exercising the functions of a state bank. It doesn't say it's a government-owned state bank. It clearly says in black and white, founded in 1694 as a private company and now exercising the functions of a state bank. That is a private company that issues notes that are worthless bits of paper and that are backed up by nothing.
There are two great ironies about the Queen and Duke visiting the Bank of England there and asking those questions, and that is that first of all the owners of the Bank of England, that is the private owners, the Jewish owners, were not there to greet the Queen and the Duke, and how often does that happen? And the second is that these owners who also own the trading banks outside the Bank of England were the cause of the financial crisis in the first place.
Starting as early as 2007, currency traders at several multinational banks formed a group that they dubbed the cartel. It's perhaps fitting that they chose that name, as it aptly describes the brazenly illegal behavior that they were engaged in on a near 5-year basis. Almost every day, for more than 5 years, traders in this cartel used a private electronic chat room to manipulate the spot market's exchange rate between euros and dollars, using coded language to conceal their collusion. They acted as partners rather than competitors in an effort to push the exchange rate in directions favorable to their banks but detrimental to many others. Now, the prices the market sets for those currencies influence virtually every sector of every economy in the world. Their actions inflated the bank's profits while harming countless consumers, investors, and institutions around the globe, from pension funds to major corporations, and including the bank's own customers, who placed their faith in the market and relied on it to produce a competitive exchange rate. As a result of our investigation, 4 of the world's largest banks have agreed to plead guilty to felony antitrust violations. They are Citicorp, JP Morgan Chase & Company, Barclays plc, and the Royal Bank of Scotland plc.
Hello and welcome to Money Trail with me, Amir Arfat. Today, the international banking cartel, from the Rothschilds to the House of Morgan to the Federal Reserve. Who controls the world's money?
The 4 horsemen of banking, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo, own the 4 horsemen of oil, ExxonMobil, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, and Chevron Texaco. In tandem with Deutsche Bank, BNP, Barclays, and other European old money behemoths. But their monopoly over the global economy does not end at the edge of the oil patch. According to company 10-K filings to the SEC, the 4 horsemen of banking are among the top 10 stockholders of virtually every Fortune 500 corporation.
The fact is 52% of the New York Fed is owned by these 8 families. It's the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, Goldman Sachs, Lehman's, Lazards, Warburgs, Kuhn-Loebs, and Israel Moses Seifs. And the latter family, that goes back to the Genoese bankers, you know, when they first moved into Europe. And these are just really old families. And you know the saying, money begets more money, you know, you got to have money to make money. Well, guess what? These people had money in the 16th century, whatever. And so, you know, many people estimate that the Rothschilds, the richest of these families, are worth over $100 trillion.
The international banking cartel is a consortium of about 15 to 20 to 25 international banks of large magnitude with large amounts of political influence. These are the too big to fail banks around the world. They're too big to fail. They're too big to jail. And they are essentially the ones who control the private central banks of the world, because in most countries, United States, Britain, Germany, Japan, and so on down the line, the central bank is a privately controlled institution, even if it's not always, formally speaking, privately owned.
The control that these banking families exert over the global economy cannot be overstated and is quite intentionally shrouded in secrecy. Their corporate media arm is quick to discredit any information exposing this private central banking cartel as conspiracy theory, yet the facts remain.
And what my book is about is how they've established this total monopoly over the 3 most valuable commodities in the world: guns, drugs, and oil. And then, worse yet, they've taken over the central banks of every country, not just the Federal Reserve, but, you know, the Bank of England, the Bundesbank, the Bank of France, Bank of Australia. I mean, you name it. And it's just stranger than fiction that this can happen. But, you know, these banking cartels with our fiat currency system, where they can, you know, print more money, lend out more money than they actually have in reserve, and the government backs it.
We have the Royal Bank of Scotland. We have HSBC, that's the old Hong Kong, Shanghai Banking Corporation. Lloyds Bank, TSB, that has absorbed HBOS, Building Society. That is followed then by Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, UBS, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank and Westdeutsche Landesbank of Germany, Société Générale of France, the Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi UJF, Norin Chukin of Japan, Royal Bank of Canada, and Rabobank of the Netherlands. Now that group, 15, 16 banks, that is essentially the heart of the cartel.
One important repository for the wealth of the global oligarchy that owns these bank holding companies is U.S. Trust Corporation, founded in 1853 and now owned by Bank of America. A recent U.S. Trust corporate director and honorary trustee was Walter Rothschild. Other directors included Daniel Davison of J.P. Morgan Chase, Richard Tucker of ExxonMobil, Daniel Roberts of Citigroup, and Marshall Schwartz of Morgan Stanley.
Basically, it's like these families are running this printing press, and they get countries in debt, they get individuals in debt, they get companies in debt, and when those people go into debt and can't pay their loans back, then these bankers come in and seize the real asset, which is the house, the car, the Mexican National Cement Company, which is what they did in the Mexican debt crisis in 1997. The way they got out of that was they handed over all their state assets to Asarco, and B&N took over the whole railroad in Mexico. And, you know, it's a scam.
And now the world's biggest and perhaps oldest modern banking family. Ladies and gentlemen, the Rothschilds.
In 1694, William III teamed up with the UK aristocracy to launch the Private Bank of England. The Rothschilds and their inbred 8 families partners gradually came to control the Bank of England. Mayor Amschel Rothschild once said, quote, "I care not who controls a nation's political affairs, so long as I control her currency."
When Amschel Meyer Bauer inherited the business, he decided to change his name to Rothschild. Amschel soon learned that loaning money to governments and kings was more profitable than loaning to private individuals. Not only were the loans bigger, but they were secured by the nation's taxes. Mayor Rothschild had 5 sons. He trained them all in the skills of money creation, then sent them out to the major capitals of Europe to open branch offices of the family banking business. His first son, Amschel Meyer, stayed in Frankfurt to mind the hometown bank. His second son, Solomon, was sent to Vienna. His third son, Nathan, was clearly the most clever. He was sent to London at age 21 in 1798, 100 years after the founding of the Bank of England. His fourth son, Karl, went to Naples, and his fifth son, Jacob, went to Paris. Rothschilds soon grew unbelievably wealthy. By the mid-1800s, they dominated all European banking and were certainly the wealthiest family in the world.
It's time now to take a closer look at the Rothschild family and how they rose to power early in the 19th century, at the time of the Napoleonic Wars, which all 5 brothers funded from different sides of the war. And Nathan Rothschild received 48 hours in advance information that England had won the Battle of Waterloo before the British Parliament and British public found out, and he went into the Royal Exchange and began selling his bonds and collapsed the bond market as if England had lost. And then the news came through that England had won, and slowly the bond market recovered as Rothschild bought into the market again and made another killing. And this is the story told by Jacob Rothschild.
I think the edge over families like the Barings with whom they were competing was that they had their brothers in very important financial centres and countries. Now, whether that was premeditated, whether they thought that through as they got out of the ghetto, it's hard to believe that they went as far as that. But that's what happened, and once they saw that it was an advantage, I think they worked on that advantage.
In March 1815, Napoleon returned to Paris from exile in Elba, determined to revive his imperial ambitions. The Rothschilds immediately ramped up their gold operation, buying up all the bullion and coins they could lay their hands on. Nathan's reason for buying this huge stock of gold was simple. He assumed that, as with all Napoleon's wars, this would be a long one. His gold would be more and more sought after, and it would rise in value. It proved to be a near fatal miscalculation. Wellington famously called the Battle of Waterloo the nearest run thing you ever saw in your life. After a day of brutal charges, counter-charges and heroic defence, the late arrival of the Prussian army finally proved decisive. For Wellington, it was a glorious victory. But not for the Rothschilds. No doubt it was gratifying to Nathan Rothschild to be the first to hear the news of Napoleon's defeat. Thanks to the swiftness of the Rothschild couriers, he heard it fully 48 hours before Major Henry Percy delivered Wellington's official dispatch to the British cabinet. But no matter how early he heard it, the news from Waterloo was anything but good from Nathan's point of view. He had bargained for something much more protracted. Now he and his brothers were sitting on top of a pile of cash that nobody wanted to pay for a war that was over. With the coming of peace, the great armies that had fought Napoleon could be disbanded. That meant no more gold for soldiers' wages, and it meant the price of gold, which had soared during the war, would fall. Nathan was faced with heavy and growing losses. There was only one possible way out. Nathan could use the Rothschild gold to make a massive and hugely risky bet on the bond market. On July the 20th, 1815, the evening edition of the London Courier reported that Nathan had made great purchases of stock, meaning British government bonds. Nathan's gamble was that the British victory at Waterloo would send the price of British bonds soaring upwards. Nathan bought, and as the price of bonds began to rise, he kept on buying. Despite his brother's desperate entreaties to sell, Nathan held his nerve for another year. Eventually, in July 1817, with bond prices up by 40%, he sold his holding. His profits were worth approximately £600 million today. The Rothschilds had shown that bonds were more than just a way for governments to fund their wars. They could also be bought and sold in a way that generated serious money. And with money came power.
Did you know Stanley Kubrick filmed his famous movie Eyes Wide Shut inside the Rothschild family's country estate? Theories swirled that Kubrick made his movie about the real-life ultra-elite and their secret occultic gatherings. Well, take a look at these pictures that show an actual Rothschild event from 1972. On the surface, it looks like a pretty magnificent surrealist ball, but there are clear occult references. Much like the film Eyes Wide Shut, occult imagery is hidden throughout the night, starting with the invitations, which were written backwards. Reversal or inversion of sacred objects is typical of black magic and satanic rituals. The exterior of the Château de Ferrier is lit up in a moving orange light, giving it the appearance of a fiery inferno. Here's some MK Ultra programming. Many guests are wearing masks with multiple faces. Victims of MK Ultra programming report systematic and ritualized pedophilia, drug and sexual abuse, and torture designed to deliberately shatter the minds of victims into multiple personalities called alters, which can be molded and manipulated at will. This hat, designed by Dali, also has hidden symbolism of androgyny by having half of Mona Lisa's face. Harnessing the male and female power is important to practitioners of the left-hand path. And although Dali traditionally paints ants and grasshoppers in his paintings to evoke death, decay, and trauma, this work of art has scarab beetles, which symbolize the Egyptian mysticism of Osiris, the Sun King. Bird cages weren't just a popular costume, but they also symbolize physical and psychological bondage. This guest's costume resembles the famous painting Son of Man by Magritte. Both the apple and the eye of Horus symbolize the forbidden knowledge of Lucifer in the Garden of Eden. The hostess, Marie-Helene de Rothschild, is seen wearing a giant horned head, crying real diamond tears. Is this a representation of the sacrifice to Baphomet, who will share wealth and riches only after sacrifice? It's not exactly clear when in 1972 this party took place, but from the look of the decorations and the menu, it's definitely a fertility ritual. The dinner table serves dismembered dolls and cracked skulls, a possible reference to MKUltra doll programming and the lifelessness of their victims who literally crack after their mind control wiring goes haywire. For dessert, a human sacrifice in a bed of roses. The rose, of course, is a symbol used by many secret societies, and it represents virginity, fertility, sexuality, and immortality, as well as silence and secrecy. Here's Salvador Dali, who helmed the Surrealist movement. At first, this could seem like a Surrealism party in his honor, but consider the aims of the Surrealism movement itself, to resolve the contradictory condition of dreams versus reality, and allow the unconscious mind to express itself. Occult imagery is very real, and it's everywhere, in movies, television, music, and fashion. The power derived from these occult symbols and imagery is very real to the elitists that congregate in their separate reality.
So shall we burn thee once again this night, and in the flames that eat thine effigy, we shall read the sign, Midsummer sets us free. Ye shall burn me once again. Not with me, Wayne. Summer sets us free.
And that is just the tip of the iceberg. The elites are riddled with perverse secret societies that are obsessed with harnessing the power of dark forces.
For over 100 years, Skull and Bones members have included a president, vice presidents, Supreme Court justices, congressmen and senators, captains of science and industry, the very best of America.
Their God is Lord, their advisor, their better.
There's the public perception of the occult, and then what is actually happening. It's fantasy and folklore versus the real, intangible, dark power that the elite are able to harness by being practitioners of the occult. And it's this very art and imagery that we see over and over again, that it's just the expression of their dark soul.
And so this cultic combo of the Jews, Catholics and Freemasons are all involved in the Knights Templars of yesteryear, and today they still control the world currencies. And many people are trying to shrug off this burden that we have that's placed on us by these people, as this Canadian girl explains.
Economists around the world are struggling to break free of the clutches of the financial crisis, but a 12-year-old Canadian knows what needs to be done. Victoria Grant took the internet by storm overnight after a video of her slamming Canada's banks for robbing the people went viral.
What I have discovered is the banks and the government have colluded to financially enslave the people of Canada. When a bank gives you a mortgage, which literally means a death pledge or a loan, they don't actually give you money. They click a key on a computer and generate the fake money out of thin air. It has become painfully obvious, even for me, a 12-year-old Canadian, that we are being defrauded and robbed by the banking system and a complicit government. What will we do to stop this crime?
Well, we've got internet sensation Victoria Grant and her mother, Marcia Grant, on the line from Canada right now. So, Victoria, I watched all of your speech. It's quite long. So can you just very briefly tell us what's been bothering you about Canada's banking system?
Well, what's been bothering me is that our government has been borrowing money from private banks and putting us into debt, and they're not doing anything about this. So they're just standing by and watching the private banks make us pay compounded interest.
Well, clearly you understand what's happening there in your country. Do you have any solutions for the world's economic problems?
My solution is that we stop borrowing from private banks and we start borrowing from the Bank of Canada with little to no interest.
All right, but okay, now you're just 12 years old. Why do you think you understand what's wrong with the economy, that you have the answer and world leaders don't?
Well, I've been researching and watching documentaries and like reading books, and it's not that hard to understand once you start researching. And like world leaders, they probably know what's happening. It's just they're not doing anything about it.
And so it's a good thing that that Canadian girl had been educated by her father, because she never would have been educated to those things by our secular atheistic education system that we have in the Western world today.